The bus stop stood alone, a lonely sentinel under a sky choked with clouds. A single flickering streetlight cast a sickly yellow glow, barely penetrating the thick darkness. The air hung heavy and damp, smelling of wet asphalt and something else. Something vaguely metallic. Sarah huddled on the metal bench, her thin jacket a poor defense against the biting wind. She pulled her scarf tighter, the rough wool scratching her cheek. Her breath formed small clouds in the frigid air, disappearing as quickly as they appeared. Each exhale brought a tremor to her body, a constant reminder of the cold seeping into her bones. Where was the damn bus? It was already midnight, the last vestiges of the city's life long extinguished. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant whine of a siren and the rhythmic drip of water from the leaky bus stop roof. The rhythmic plinking of water into a puddle was a maddening counterpoint to the frantic beating of her heart. Every rustle of leaves in the nearby trees sent a jolt of fear through her. She was utterly alone. Sarah tried to distract herself, focusing on the cracked pavement and the overflowing trash can. Anything to avoid the shadows that seemed to writhe and twist at the edge of the light. A sudden gust of wind slammed into her, stealing her breath. It felt colder than the air around it, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. She glanced at her watch again, the luminous hands mocking her with their slow progress. Still no bus. A wave of unease washed over her, stronger than before. It wasn't just the lateness of the hour or the unsettling quiet. A primal instinct whispered a warning, urging her to flee. She chided herself for being paranoid. It was just a bus stop, just a dark street. But the feeling persisted, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the stillness, smell it in the metallic tang that lingered in the air. She glanced over her shoulder, scanning the darkness beyond the streetlight's reach. The shadows seemed to have deepened, pressing closer, hungry. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing the growing fear that threatened to consume her. The wind picked up, swirling fallen leaves into miniature tornadoes. The shadows danced more violently now, twisting and contorting in the flickering light. Or were they dancing? A chill snaked down her spine, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were moving of their own accord, no longer simply puppets of the wind. She strained to hear over the wind, her senses on high alert. The distant siren had fallen silent, leaving only the drip, drip, drip of water and the rustling leaves. And then she heard it, a soft shuffling sound coming from the darkness beyond the pool of light. It was a slow, dragging sound, like footsteps, but off. Too heavy, too deliberate. Her breath hitched in her throat, and she found herself holding it, listening with every fiber of her being. The shuffling stopped. Silence, thick and heavy, descended once more. She told herself it was nothing, just a stray animal, her imagination running wild. But the primal fear continued to gnaw at her, whispering that she was not alone, that something was out there, hidden in the shadows, watching her. The fog rolled in, thick and white, as if summoned from the darkness itself. It swallowed the shadows, obscuring the already limited visibility. The streetlight struggled against the mist, its light diffused and useless. Sarah felt a tremor of fear run through her, and then she saw it, a figure emerging from the swirling fog. It was tall and gaunt, its outlines blurred and indistinct. Terror, cold and sharp, pierced through her. This was something else entirely. It stood there, unmoving, radiating a palpable sense of malice. Sarah was paralyzed, frozen in place by fear. The figure took another step, and the metallic scent in the air intensified, making Sarah gag. It was the smell of blood, she realized with a growing horror. The figure was drenched in it. She wanted to look away, to close her eyes and will herself to disappear. But she couldn't. She was rooted to the spot, her gaze locked on the approaching figure like a rabbit staring into the eyes of a snake. The figure moved with an eerie grace, its movements almost hypnotic. Each step it took seemed to suck the air from her lungs, making it harder to breathe. The world shrunk until it was just her and the figure, the fog a swirling vortex around them, separating them from reality. Time seemed to distort, stretching and compressing in a maddening dance. 1 minute the figure was at the edge of the light, the next it was standing just a few feet away. Sarah could make out more details now, the frayed edges of the trench coat, the mud caked on its heavy boots, the glint of something metallic clutched in one hand. The figure tilted its head, as if studying her. A low chuckle, rasping and dry, echoed from beneath the hat. The sound sent chills down her spine, prickling her skin with gooseflesh. It was the sound of something inhuman, something ancient and evil. Her mind screamed at her to run, to fight, to do anything but stand there like a deer in headlights. But her body was unresponsive, locked in place by a terror so profound it transcended physical control. She was a puppet, her strings controlled by the creature before her, dancing to a macabre melody only it could hear. The figure took another step, closing the distance between them. The smell of blood was overpowering now, making her eyes water. She could feel its gaze on her, heavy and oppressive, like a physical weight pressing her down. She had the feeling that it was looking deep inside her, seeing her fear, her vulnerability, her utter helplessness. It raised its hand, the one clutching the metallic object. It was a hook, she realized, its once shiny surface now dull and crusted with something that glinted wetly in the dim light. The figure moved with lightning speed, the hook arcing through the air towards her. A scream formed in her throat, but it was cut short as the hook found its mark, sinking into her flesh with a sickening crunch. Pain exploded through her body, white-hot and blinding. She tried to scream again, but the sound died in a strangled gasp. The figure pulled back on the hook, dragging her towards it. Her feet scraped against the rough asphalt, but it was no use. She was no match for its inhuman strength. The world spun around her, a dizzying kaleidoscope of fog, blood and terror. She managed to raise her hand, her fingers scrabbling uselessly at the trench coat. She felt something cold and hard beneath her fingers, like bone. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a person, not anymore. It was something else, something wearing a human shell. The figure dragged her through the fog, its grip on the hook unwavering. She caught a glimpse of its face as it leaned down, its breath hot and rancid on her cheek. The hat had fallen back, revealing a skull, leering and skeletal, beneath the tattered remnants of skin. Empty sockets stared back at her, devoid of humanity, filled with a cold, predatory hunger. The last vestiges of hope drained away, replaced by a bone-chilling certainty. This was the end. She would disappear into the fog, another victim claimed by the darkness. No one would ever know what happened to her. She would become just another missing person poster, her face staring out from lampposts, a silent plea for help that would never come. The figure dragged her to the edge of the road, where the fog swirled thick and impenetrable. She could hear the soft gurgling of water, and she realized with a shudder that it was taking her to the river. It chuckled again, the sound a grating rasp that seemed to claw at her sanity. A horn blared, loud and insistent. The figure stiffened, its head snapping up towards the sound. Summoning the last reserves of her strength, Sarah lashed out, kicking at the figure with all her might. The hook tore free, and Sarah collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for breath. Headlights cut through the fog, blindingly bright. The bus screeched to a halt beside her, its doors hissing open. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. She stumbled onto the bus, collapsing onto the nearest seat. As the bus pulled away, she risked one last glance at the fog-shrouded street.